I welcome you to the second of our three-part series, Remembering the Holocaust, Never Forget to Never Repeat. I have the honor today of introducing our State Superintendent of Public Instruction for this great state of Michigan, Dr. Michael Rice. It is through his vision that we provide an assurance of Michigan students having opportunities to learn history from a comprehensive stance. As such, Dr. Rice is committed to the teaching of history through diverse viewpoints while highlighting historical movements and events that have shaped our nation. His vision will aid in the rise of student engagement and excitement around historical content on civic involvement. And now we will hear from Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. I appreciate your leadership. Thank you so much. I want to begin with a thanks to Renee Garcia, our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, without whom we could not have begun this important series on the teaching of comprehensive history instruction. I also want to thank our presenters, Dr. Ann Piontkowski and Rick Schaffner. They are intrepid in that they are the leaders. They are the beginners of this important teaching comprehensive history instruction series. In the spring of 1976, I had yet to turn 14 years old, and my father and I were in a Yiddish class that we were taking that was actually being offered by a Holocaust survivor. And I remember that it was on his arm that I saw for the first time numbers. I had read about them, I'd heard about them, but I'd never actually seen them. And I remember that when I finally connected what I was seeing on his arm to what I had read, I can remember the epiphany and the horror associated with that moment. That moment would be repeated when I went to the Dachau concentration camp just a few years later. It would be repeated when I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington a few years after that. These awakenings, these moments where we learn, whether they are learning moments of joy or learning moments of challenge or horror, are so important to our rounding out of our history, not simply in this country, but in the world. We believe strongly that our young people are capable, subject to developmental appropriateness, of learning all of our history. And that includes the history that makes us uncomfortable or that may horrify us at a given moment. Because what we're trying to do is to learn from that history, not to repeat the worst of it, to be inspired by the best of it, and to progress from all of it. So with that said, I turn the show, if you will, over to Scott Koenig, our social studies consultant in the department, with appreciation for Ann and Rick's work and presentation over the three-part series. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Scott Koenig, and I am a social studies consultant with Michigan Department of Education, as Dr. Rice introduced. We're thrilled to have all of you in attendance as we launch the Comprehensive History webinar series. So before I introduce today's session moderators, I want to share a few housekeeping announcements. Participants, video, audio, and chat features have been turned off. So questions during the presentation may be added to a document that I will add a link in the chat for us. And then we'll share towards the end of the event if time permits during the presentation. Also, if you would like sketches, SCCHs, be sure to sign the form link that I'll put into the chat as well for you. So again, I'll put a link in for you to sign for a request or sign in for a request for sketches. You can adjust your speaker view options anytime by clicking the view button at the top right Zoom window. Just as a friendly reminder, the session is being recorded. Also, towards the end of today's presentation, a survey link will be placed in the chat. So we would really like your feedback. And then finally, closed captioning and American Sign Language interpreters have been provided. If closed captioning isn't automatically visible, select the CC option and click Enable. And your interpreter for today is Rebecca Ritchie. Thanks, Becca, for helping us out. Okay, now on to our esteemed moderators. Dr. Ann Piontkowski is currently an assistant professor in the School of Education at Madonna University and former education specialist at the Zekelman Holocaust Center. While there, she worked with the middle school, secondary, and pre-service teachers at the university level in the Holocaust content and delivery trainings, which honor fidelity to historical content. Prior to coming to the Holocaust Center, Dr. Piontkowski served as program director in the School of Education for Educational Leadership Immersion at Oakland University, both within the campus setting and internationally. As a teacher for over 30 years, both in public and private education, elementary and secondary levels, Dr. Piontkowski is pleased to share with you essential knowledge in the teaching of the Holocaust and its imperative nature to the scope of history. Mr. Rick Schaffner has over 20 years of experience in public, private, and international education, 13 years of which as a central office school administrator at the district and county level in curriculum and instruction in Michigan. Rick has been responsible for multiple areas of leadership experience globally, including curriculum program and resource design, new school concept design, teacher and school leader professional development, school improvement facilitation, grant writing, and school partnership building. Currently, Rick is the manager of education outreach for the Zekelman Holocaust Center and is responsible for working with teachers to develop their Holocaust education knowledge and teaching practice, as well as working with schools across Michigan to connect educators and students to the many resources available at the HC. And Rick, take the virtual show away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you today. Great to be with you, Rick. It's good to see you.
Good to see everyone again that was here last week.
And last week we focused on oral testimonies. This week we're going to be focusing on the use of artifacts. So we're going from hearing and from the speaking and listening of the Holocaust and learning about it to actual objects and learning to have an inquiry-based approach to analyzing artifacts, viewing them and sharing them with our students. And that goes right along with our mission at the Zekelman Holocaust Center. I had the privilege of working there with Rick, and our full mission is to engage you and to educate you and your students and empower you by remembering the Holocaust. Our entire focus of the center is on Holocaust education. That is what we do. We are laser focused. We were founded in 1984 as the first Holocaust Center in the United States, and we are still the only Holocaust Center in the state of Michigan, either in the Upper or Lower Peninsula. So we are just steeped in the educational thread and outreach of this very, very important chapter in history. So we warmly welcome you to come to the center, up, running, ready for visitors. I believe school tours, Rick, are even increasing at this time, all the time.
So tons every day, yes.
So we warmly welcome you. And I know you're going to be sharing program goals today, Rick.
Yes. So we have a few goals today. One, as we did last week with the oral testimonies, we really want to acknowledge artifacts as an important part of historical investigation and thinking about the arc of inquiry and C3 and all of the things that come with that. This is a key ingredient, particularly when teaching Holocaust education. We also want to get across that you need to consider primary source artifacts and how they relate to the historical content that you're teaching. Obviously, we understand that not everybody can come to the museum. Not everybody has that opportunity because of maybe distance, but there are ways that you can inject artifacts, and we'll talk about that today. Next week, we also want to talk about how we support historical context by using artifacts. artifacts come in all different forms. And just because you might not have a physical, tangible thing to hold on to doesn't mean that there aren't artifacts that you can use with your students, whether it's pictures, artwork, or several other options that we're going to show you today. And then, of course, we want to describe some different scenarios for you in which the different types of artifacts can be used to teach with. And then lastly, just showing you the number of accessible things and resources. And if you're joining us next week, we're going to get into that even further about the different types of artifacts and testimonies that you can use as a teaching reference as you begin to dive into these things.
And the use of artifacts aligns directly with our pedagogical principles. The pedagogical principles, which comes to us originally from Echoes and Reflections. Echoes and Reflections is an online institutional entity that shares free of charge very comprehensive Holocaust educational materials. And they have outlined 9 core principles, which for Rick and I in our work, they are the foundational pieces to what we do. It's very, very important, as we talked about last week, to make sure that terms are defined, background information within historical context is presented in order to contextualize history. We continually talk about teaching the human story, which will come through again today through the use of primary source materials, which makes it even more relevant to students because they can see and hear and feel that time in history because these are primary source artifacts. It encourages inquiry-based learning, critical thinking, questioning, and just wraps around you as the experts in your classroom in social studies education, and for many of our teachers, even ELA education, in having conversations and various delivery models of instruction within your classroom, whether it be individually, small group, or whole class instruction. It's very important for us to foster empathy and understanding. When we talk about empathy, we do understand that it is never possible to walk in the shoes of somebody who has experienced the Holocaust, even those individuals who were both in different camps or even the same camps during the Holocaust. They have different experiences and different stories based on where they came from and their experiences within those settings. So we really look to foster understanding through increased knowledge and increased use of various platforms and resources that are available to students. And for us, that ensures a very supportive learning environment. It's a safely in, safely out approach that's open to questioning and open to learning more as we move along. These are our 9 foundational pieces that when we are structuring conversations, tours, writings, or even presentations such as today, this is the foundational document on which we wrap everything around. So you can be guaranteed that everything in this presentation that will be shared with you afterwards as well for your professional use is of the highest caliber and highest quality. It's research-based and peer-reviewed, and it is used with thousands and thousands of students, not only in Michigan, but across the country.
So thinking about, we touched on this a little bit last time as well, as we all know that under Public Act 170, obviously we're required to teach genocide and Holocaust education. And with that came the advent of standards and things that were put into place to really address the specifics of Holocaust education and the kinds of things that we wanted to teach our students. It's important though to really think beyond the boundaries of the classroom in the social studies classroom. Many schools are still using this in their language arts and using contextual history. In fact, we provide training sessions for specific titles and even a new one that we're offering in language arts instruction around how to build contextual history as well. We see this in books like Night and Diary of Anne Frank, but there's even more titles that schools are now using. And while they might be banned in some places, certain titles, they're not here. So, but all of our work, along with the pedagogical principles, are rooted in the instructional shifts from C3 as well. And the idea that the arc of inquiry overlaps in all of the key ingredients when we're talking about artifacts. The idea that you use an artifact in the classroom, whether it's a picture or a resource, really ties in all of these standards very nicely because it allows students a realistic opportunity to see something that connects with the time period, which may seem very, very far away for a lot of students, as you know.
Well, I'm really pleased that you shared that C3 framework, because I do know, especially going back to our mission, our teachers are at the forefront of the work that we do at the Holocaust Center. So I know, Rick, you're going to touch on that just a little bit.
Sure. So let's talk about how this all connects together, because we see it as kind of a three-pronged approach. One, we know there's high school content expectations. That doesn't go away, and that's what kind of guides us for state assessments, but also the content that we need to teach. But then we also have to layer those instructional shifts that are also in the state standards, and also the idea behind the arc of inquiry. And that gets into creating collaborative context, integrating the content and skills. Inquiry, which is at the heart of all of our work. I'm a former science and math teacher, and inquiry was always there, but it's nice to see this now that's really woven into social studies as well, because it allows students to be able to articulate like historians. And if our goal is really to do that and getting them to begin to take informed action, we have to develop their curiosity for inquiry around those standards. But now what we would suggest is you lay on these pedagogical principles, which very much overlap with the instructional shifts, because by doing these things that Anne mentioned moments ago, it allows us to teach the human story, which is what we focus on. And in this case, we're going to teach you through artifacts today, but it also shares a visual story. It allows us to remove all of the other elements and really focus on the human element, because what we would suggest at the Holocaust Center is that we don't focus on just the perpetrators of the Holocaust. We focus on the survivors and the victims. We learn their stories before, during, and after the Holocaust. It allows us to foster that empathy and create a more supportive environment, and really making the Holocaust more real, but it also helps our students articulate this more like a historian based on fact that's rooted in good history.
And a part of that articulation, going back to the very first thread of the pedagogical principles, is to define terms. It's very, very important that all of your students or colleagues, or whatever context in which you're teaching the Holocaust, are all on the same page with what the definition of what the Holocaust is. In Hebrew, it means Shoah. It is the systematic destruction of European Jewry at the hands of the Nazis during World War II. The Holocaust was more than a time period. The Holocaust was a very specific Jewish experience. It was an experience of the Jewish people. Now, there were other groups that suffered during the Holocaust, homosexuals, Sinti Roma, the Gypsies. Each of those different groups have their own name for what they endured during that time. Even those children under the various beginnings of the use of camps and incarceration, and the disabled as well, who were taken from their families. There is a specific terminology that goes with the various groups. So it needs to be very clear that the Holocaust, when we are referencing it, is a specific Jewish experience in a chapter in time that is specifically occurring because of the Jewish faith and tradition. It's a Greek word. It translates into a Hebrew word, olah, and an olah was a type of a sacrifice to God that was totally consumed or burnt by fire. Consequently, your students will be able to clearly understand when they get to the final learnings about the Holocaust, when they talk about the final solution. This aligns with the term Shoah, olah, total consummation by fire. Over time, the Holocaust is used to be known as large-scale slaughter or destruction. This comes from Yad Vashem. Again, all of these resources are crosswalked and vetted with research-based higher education institutions, as well as those that are steeped in Holocaust education and mission. So if we go to the next slide, and we talk about the spelling of it. We went into this a great deal last time. We're just going to touch on it today. When we talk about anti-Semitism, we are talking about the hatred of Jews as an individual, as a group, or a concept. Hatred. And so when we talk about anti-Semitism, there is a document, there are links on this page that you can get to at your own time. But in a nutshell, when the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance went into great debate and took some time to clearly articulate the spelling of anti-Semitism. They said the hyphen makes the difference, because when you say anti-Semitism, you're saying it's against Semites. Anti-Semitism is that hatred against Semites. Semites were a group defined by an older traditional language, primarily with Jews and Arabs. It was capitalized on in the late 1800s for propaganda reasons. Anti-Semitism was then drawn into meaning anti-Jewish. So it morphed for propaganda and political reasons to funnel down into being against Jews, specifically for their Jewish beliefs and tradition and who they were as people in faith. When you are spelling anti-Semitism, there is no hyphen. Anti-Semitism is one word. It is only capitalized if it is at the beginning of a sentence. And the reason for that is that anti-Semitism implies hatred against Semites. This is a specifically Jewish term. Again, these links will take you to more information and also to print-offs from IHRA that you can use with your students. So if we go to the next slide, and I know that we're talking about the power of artifacts, there's an excellent link here that Rick is going to share with you today that gives an overview of their use from a Holocaust Center perspective.
Please let me know if the sound is.
At the Holocaust Memorial Center, we have hundreds of artifacts and other items on display for our visitors to learn from. Unlike reading panels on a wall or paragraphs in a textbook, these objects tell stories and provide an opportunity to directly connect with the past. We want to know what it is, where it came from, who it belongs to. They provide clues to guide our study and help us find lessons for today. This artifact is a children's book called Trust No Fox on His Green Heath and No Jew on His Oath. It was published in Germany in 1936. Soon after Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, efforts were made to organize society according to Nazi ideology. In this ideology, people were defined by their race. Germans, or Aryans, were the superior race, whereas Jews were inferior. They were evil and were the primary enemy of the German people. Life, therefore, began to look and feel very different for Jewish people in Germany. There were boycotts against Jewish-owned businesses, Jewish professionals holding government jobs as lawyers and judges, and even as public school teachers and professors were dismissed from their positions. Jewish doctors could not treat non-Jewish patients. And public book burnings took place throughout Germany, in which many books written by Jewish authors were burned. Anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jewish people, had existed long before the Nazis came to power in Germany. The long-standing and deeply rooted stereotypes and beliefs were used as the core of Nazi ideology. Joseph Goebbels, head of the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, was responsible for communicating Nazi messaging and ideology through the media, films, books, radio broadcasts, newspapers, posters, and educational materials reach people all over the country. Across all of these platforms, stereotypes of Jewish people were spread to stir up suspicion, fear, and hatred. In 1936, Julius Streicher published this children's book. It was written by Elvira Bauer, who at the time was an 18-year-old kindergarten teacher. The goal was to instill hate at a very young age. On the cover of the book, you see a drawing of a Jew and a fox. Throughout Nazi propaganda, both foxes and Jews are depicted as cunning creatures that could not be trusted. Each page of the book contains a nursery rhyme that describes Jewish people as ugly, sneaky, and frightening.
We do not buy from Jewish shops, says the mother to the child. 'Tis only German goods we buy. Remember that, my darling. It's going to be fine in the schools at last, for all of the Jews must leave.
These words, images, and messages mattered. People of all ages were influenced by these ideas, and their hateful thoughts and biased attitudes led to actions. Martin Lowenberg, a local Holocaust survivor and speaker at our museum, was born in 1928 in Schenklingsfeld, Germany. In 1936, when Martin was in 3rd grade, his teacher falsely accused him of sticking his tongue out at a picture of Hitler. In response, his classmates beat him up. The hatred they had learned turned into violence. After this incident, Martin's parents sent him to a Jewish boarding school 150 miles away from home. Martin continues to share his story at our museum today to help us understand the dangerous consequences of hate. Where do you see hatred in our world today? What can be done to help change its course? What can you do to make a difference?
And so as we finish up viewing that piece, if we go to the next slide, Rick, one of the reasons that piece is so powerful is it's focused on artifacts that we have right in the center. And those artifacts are steeped in symbolism. And I know, Rick, you're going to talk to the symbolism that we see all the time in the center, but I'm sure many have seen throughout their communities and or state or country. So if you could talk with those, I'm going to speak a little bit further about the power of artifacts and why that previous clip was so meaningful. Rick?
Thank you, Anne. And as one of the many tools that we would use is in terms of artifacts, or certainly the symbols, as Anne has mentioned. As you learn from the clip, that the symbolism in books alone, it goes much further than that. From the armbands that you'll see in our museum that were worn and even still worn by groups today, to cartoons as new as 2011, like you see here, depicting certain political allies as some sort of, anti-Semitic rant because they don't like certain world policies. Then you continue into, this below, you can see how the symbols from many years ago that are depicting the Jewish people as some sort of devilish figure, from the hunched eyebrows and the ears and the noses. Many of us think part of the reason we like to use the symbols is because we think that these are the symbols that were used during the war. This is how that led to the Holocaust. But even this particular symbol here, which is found in Mexico from something called the Protocols, the Elders of Zion, which was a very, very anti-Semitic book that was passed out well over time, that it certainly has its roots here in Michigan as well, through Ford vehicles that once contained them in the glove box. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the graphics behind this with the Jewish Star of David and all of the symbols on the fingers, it's still very rampant today. This particular ad used just a couple of years ago in the Edmonton Journal, a very familiar ad, a Capital One ad. We've all seen the commercials. As you can then look a little further, this creature that we see here that is just trying to hack your wallet through your credit cards and all these awful things. Another depiction of Jewish culture. Typically what you'll see in the symbols, and why we like to show these with teachers, particularly in our session that we do on media literacy and propaganda, is it's always the same figure. It's this horrible looking human being, big nose, big ears, not kept. As you saw in the children's book, they're scary, right? But even more modern, and I think part of the reason we like to show symbols in classrooms, depending on the group that you're working with, particularly with older students, is that this stuff still goes on today. These defacing of Jewish cemeteries, this is still rampant. And all of these photos are taken from Echoes and Reflections. These are not photos that we just doctored up and came in. The photos on the left are from our museum. And then all of these other photos are also taken. These are things that are out there today. And then the last symbol we also like to share with is a great one to use because book burning was so prevalent during the Holocaust. They didn't want people to read outside word. They didn't want people to know what's going on. We see a lot of this today, and symbolism is certainly with what's going on in the Ukraine and state-sponsored media in Russia and things that are being advertised. And so it's just a gentle reminder to students about what can happen if we don't make choices that led up to this. Because as we will tell you in the Holocaust Museum, choices made, there were a lot of choices that happened that led up to this. This was not something that just fell out of the sky and happened. But symbols are an effective tool, but we would caution you to just make sure that whatever symbols you're using as part of your lesson are safe, that allow students to safely discuss and see things, and you know your students and your community as well as others. We're certainly not advocating that you stir up everything, but you also show that these symbols do mean things. They do have meaning and they do create hate. Anne, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, another piece on that, Rick, is that these are not creations that you created in your classroom. These were plucked right from advertisements, right from platforms that are already out there using these symbols. So as you're using them in your classroom, especially when we talked about inquiry-based learning, which is an essential component to robust social studies education, is that you're looking at them in an analytical way to have discussion about their origins, what this may mean to the viewer, and it can dovetail into a very rich discussion about propaganda and the use of media literacy in your classroom. You are analyzing them, looking at it in a very inquiry-based, critical thinking stance. Okay, you are not putting forth a certain opinion. You are talking about facts that are documented through historical documents across various platforms and various mediums in order to have a robust, knowledgeable, articulate conversation with your students. So you are able to fill the gaps and have a rich discussion, as Dr. Rice had spoken of at the beginning of the session, in order to share, show, and teach about history in all of its scope, not just one-sided. Even if it can be a little bit uncomfortable, you focus on the facts, you focus on those items that can be referenced and looked up across various platforms. We look at things and crosswalk items routinely in order to check opposing opinions, our opinions, going back to proving that they are factually documented in history. So as we are sharing in discussion, some will say, well, that's your opinion. Well, it's more than just an opinion. This is documented in various records, in political records, in historical records, in financial records. It's crosswalked in a variety of ways. That also lets your students have different viewpoints to the information that you are sharing within your classroom at a certain point in time in history. This being from 1939 to 1945, which was the period of the Holocaust, although some would argue that it goes back to 1933 at the beginning of Hitler's reign as chancellor in January of that year when he was appointed. But war broke out and the Germans invaded Poland September 1st of 39, the official beginning of World War II. And for some, and for staunch historians, 1939 to 1945 is the historical period of the Holocaust. Regardless of the breadth that you would like to stretch that or to take that in your study, symbols of anti-Semitism can be found in any year from 33 to 1945. And there are many, many documents to support any conversation that you have with your students in order to have a robust learning experience with your students. So as we go to the next slide and we talk about the power of artifacts to historical teaching, one of the key pieces about artifacts is that they are primary sources. They are personal objects that were actually in that point in time that have been salvaged and saved. And that makes them very, very sensorial. We talked about that children's book, which we'll talk about a little bit more. It has a very bright red cover. It was used in classrooms in Germany. it's textured, it's worn, it has appeal to self, because many of our visitors can say, I remember when I was in kindergarten, I remember story time, I remember the name of my kindergarten teacher. You have the ability to see and study for a length of time on an artifact that was used to push forth Nazi ideology during the time of the Holocaust. These are actual pieces of history. Some can be shared. Some have to be shared with gloves because of their nature. Some you have to see a picture of it. But regardless of the medium that you're using to share it, it is still a primary source. It is directly connected to historical events that can be investigated in time. And again, that's going back to that inquiry piece. We want our students to question. We want them to go look it up. We want them to align it with what is happening in your text, what is happening in the book that you're using in your ELA and or social studies classroom to teach about the Holocaust, to align it with what was happening in time. You can use various timelines. Echoes and Reflections has a beautiful one. There are many, many different artifacts that speak to different learners in different ways. And so consequently, when you have artifacts that you're able to touch and see, as your students are investigating and finding others, because you've sparked that flame of inquiry, you are having a very, very engaged student study on that piece of history, on that book, on that time period. What was happening in the Netherlands when Anne Frank was in the annex and locked there for 2 years, almost 2.5 years. So having different artifacts, here we see photographs, we have a uniform from Auschwitz, we have various Stars of David. All of these artifacts are housed within the Holocaust Center. And it provides a very human connection with our students, because our students are familiar with photographs, although they're getting away from it a little bit more with their phones. And I tell them, tell my son, you better print those off in case you lose your phone. The importance of having that piece. They can connect to that. There is DNA still attached to this uniform. We have hairbrushes and shoes and various pieces within the Holocaust Center. Here we have a beautiful diorama in the Jewish heritage portion of the center, which comes at the beginning of the tour, of a shtetl, which was made to show the robust, rich culture, a type of artifact, not primary source, but an artifact that is based upon primary source information that our visitors can see in 3D and wrap around, okay? It is truly human. That is what makes the Holocaust even more devastating, is that you have this event connection, robust, rich Jewish heritage and life that was obliterated during the 30s and 40s, during Hitler's reign. And then as we moved into the formal beginnings of the Holocaust in 1939. To see this first, the human story first, and that the sole purpose, especially towards the end of the war, as the Allies were encroaching more and more in the mid-40s, the complete annihilation of the Jews, the final solution. The purpose of that was to eradicate everything that you're seeing in these artifacts: Jewish heritage, Jewish life, Jewish memory and history. Artifacts create a space for connection to common events. You can read about them. You can write about them. When you see a comb or a hairbrush that we have in our cases, your students can relate to that. So they're very, very powerful. And by their nature, they're historical. And by their nature, they're primary. And that goes back to the pedagogical principles of using primary sources, contextualizing history, and teaching the human story.
And what's even interesting is also the fact that you can also tell the story, the human story of what it's like to move forward despite the Holocaust. And if you would tell the story real briefly about the gentleman in the picture, because this is a local survivor that, you know, you can bring a very local connection, I think, to students, for example. And would you like to share that?
Yes, if we're looking I believe this is Steve Lukowitz.
Yes.
Yes, because Ben Geyer has a familiar story. When he came back, when he miraculously survived the Holocaust, he came back to the Detroit area. He ended up actually in the Hamtramck area. And because of his heritage, he did not speak much English. So he had an uncle here, took him in, got him set up for factory work in Hamtramck. There was a Polish community there, felt at home. He saved his uniform. And when he got to a mental place where he was able to go back, take this uniform and turn it back into the uniform that he should have had as a human being in the camps, which he shouldn't have been in the first place. But he took that uniform, he had it cleaned, he had it pressed, he added collars, he added a pocket, he added buttons, which of course would never be on a prisoner's uniform, ever, because pockets are for free men. That's what he would say, because in order to have a pocket, or the need for a pocket, means that you have something to actually put into it. Now, within the camps, if you happen to know somebody who did the sewing for the officers, that's what they were assigned for their work, you might be able to have a little slit pocket sewn inside of your prisoner's uniform. And if you were found with that, that would be instant death. They would kill you on the spot. But he had honed many of those tailoring skills, and he came back here. He had a very, very rich life. And he said, that was a huge chapter in my life. And as a man, I am going to take that, I'm going to own that, and I am going to turn that into the uniform that I should have had out of human dignity. And the man that I am now, I am a man who has something to put in those pockets. And I am a man that wears a coat with buttons. And I am a man that has a collar that you can flip up if it's cold, and also it's clean and pressed. Okay, so again, we talk about that survivor piece, that human story. We had talked about the power of artifacts in this children's book, which we have in the center as well. Trust no fox on his green heath. Again, we're going with the 5 elements of artifacts and what they bring to the study of the Holocaust. And these 5 elements can be used in any study, regardless of topic, whether it be the civil rights movement, the suffragist movement, whatever it may be. The artifacts that you're using should be as sensorial as possible. This children's book is very, very colorful. This children's book was written by an 18-year-old kindergarten teacher. She was a Nazi sympathizer and supporter. About 100,000 copies of this book were created and distributed, not only in the schools, but also provision was made for families to have them in their homes and to teach students. This is a page from one of those chapters in the book. As you can see, the stereotypes that were occurring. Again, we're talking kindergarten age, so you're talking 4 to 6 years old. It was very, very important for the Nazi regime to start early. And they started in the schools and at home with picture books and various teachings, so that when they got to be about 9, 10, 11 years old, these young children could then be recruited to the Hitler Youth. Very colorful, very simple in understanding. You can see that you have the Aryan on the left, broad shoulders, blonde hair. So to a 5 or 6 year old, even if you're just learning to read, you look at the picture of the big, strong man with the big, strong shovel, which means he's working and providing, next to the depiction of a Jewish man, heavy, large nose again, big ears. Rick had talked about that. Kind of slovenly, the attire is too small, has his paperwork. He doesn't have a work shovel, has paperwork, which probably came from somebody else. So those implications, again, very sensorial. This is a primary source. There were many, many children's books, so varied platforms of this. They came in flyers, they came in simple nursery rhyme books. You can see another picture on the left here. You have the children who are mocking the Aryan children between the Jewish children, again, the large noses, and the various head coverings and the ears, the slouched composure. And these are event connections because this is allowing your students who go to school every day, okay, with other students, when even looking at a children's book, they can recognize that when you get students together, this kind of mocking and anti-Semitic behavior towards others is not only put forth, but condoned. So this is a perfect example of the power of artifacts through a children's book, which I have used powerful artifacts, children's books, even at the middle school and secondary level, because you can do a study on color, the use of the color red, which is extremely sensorial to the brain, as the brain processes color about 700,000 times faster than text. So again, the point of this artifact, if you're looking at it through a historical lens, is to teach young children, to prepare them for Hitler Youth, to prepare them for serving the Nazi regime. So as you're making these connections through Holocaust history, children's books are a great place to start. So if we take a look at the next piece, and I know you're very familiar with this piece, you see this every day when you come into work, Rick, is
Yes,
the
I do.
boxcar. I believe it's one of the largest artifacts that we have in the Holocaust Center. It was sent to us directly from Europe, and it is on a large platform, a replica of the platform that it was on before it went out on the tracks and to the camps. These boxcars were meant for cargo. They were meant possibly for a very short transport of animals, because as you can see from this boxcar, there are no windows. There is nothing inside to sit on or any platforms. It's just slats of wood. Again, regardless of your learner, if you're looking for differentiated instruction within a historical context, trains, train cars, simple color, simple size, the enormous nature of this artifact. So for your use within the classroom, you would probably use pictures, can resonate with most students. Again, very sensorial. There are different pieces that are being put together in the center so that they're able to touch a piece that naturally fell off of the boxcar. It is a primary source. This came directly from Europe, and they believe was used for the transportation from ghettos and or communities into concentration and extermination camps. These boxcars would hold up to 80 to 100 Jews standing up. There was nothing inside. So there's nothing for bathrooming. There's nothing for air outside of the slats. There is no food and there is no water. The Hamburg-Hagen train station is the replication that we have there. And I'm so glad, Rick, that you included the picture with the huge descriptions that are nestled at the end of the boxcar. They're very large. It's a huge table that many can get around to read and to look at, that talk about quotes from survivors who traveled on a train car like that, and that they were so thirsty that they were licking the sweat from each other's backs because they did not want to die. About a quarter of the people that were forced into those train cars, about a quarter of them did not make it. So if you're talking about ghettos, if you're talking about how they move from the ghettos to camps, the use of this artifact, pictures of it, or if you were to come to the center and see it in person, or even the links that we have to our site in order to take a 360 view of it, can be used very effectively as you're moving through those different units on how they moved such a mass amount of people and exterminated them. Boxcars were, of course. Go ahead, Rick.
And I would also add too, what's nice is, and we'll get into this a bit more next week in our next session, is that there's so many photos, primary resource photos that can show what it's like for, like the picture you see on the other side of the boxcar that's housed in our museum in the center here, is there's photo after photo that really shows the people waiting to line up, getting off the boxcars. They're all through Yad Vashem, through USC Show It. There's so many resources, and even some to our website that really show the human experience. And as we talked about with oral testimonies in this, it's really highlighting that human experience of what that must be like. While we're certainly not proponents of reenactment by any means, which would not be something we suggest, you can give the experience of what the realism of that through pictures and through other artifacts like this.
Yes, again, the human connection and that event connection to how you're teaching is at the core of these 5 elements that you can use with any artifact. So we're going to look for just a minute or two at our last artifact. This is a living artifact. This is our Anne Frank tree. We were one of 11 centers in North America that was bequeathed with a cutting from the tree that grew outside of Anne Frank's window in the Netherlands. When you talk about the diary of Anne Frank and the tree that she saw outside of her window, and when she would reflect in her diary, this is the child of that tree, a cutting from that sampling that we have towards the end of a tour at the HC. Again, it fulfills all 5 elements. It's directly on 3 different occasions referenced within the diary, the parent tree of this sapling. And again, this is a different type of artifact. This is a living artifact. We've seen oral testimonies, we've seen pictures, we've seen physical artifacts of various sizes. The power of this artifact connects very clearly with any ELA setting, with any readings or different quotes or various pieces of Holocaust history, especially when you're talking about the Netherlands and how the Holocaust seeped into other parts of Europe. Again, these 5 elements align directly. And again, going back to having maybe pushback on how can you prove that this is real? There are paper trails on each of these artifacts, and all of these pieces have been vetted and highly researched. So you can use them with fidelity to any Holocaust content or study of World War II through the lens of the Holocaust in your study. Is there anything you want to add to that, Rick, before we are wrapping up for the day on the power of artifacts?
No, I think what's nice about the artifacts is there's so many different places where you can get them. And even though you may not be able to physically put your hands on them on every case, the idea that you can see the primary source and know that they're local, so maybe students want to visit, but even then they tell a story. And the story leads to inquiry, and the inquiry leads to thoughts and discovery that kids might not have realized. And it brings that human element. Lastly,
they're real. Yeah, they're real items. They were actually there. They are looking at or holding a piece of history.
Absolutely. And the last area we wanted to touch on was artwork. We're fortunate for lots of reasons, because at the Holocaust Center, we have lots of different types of artwork, but artwork also tells a story, as Anne has mentioned. And we're highlighting pieces today that not only come from survivors and part of the museum, but also from students, because we also would recommend that artwork is used for students to be able to reflect on how they're viewing this time period. But particularly the 2 pieces that Anne and I wanted to highlight are particularly the one in the middle and the one on the right, bottom right corner, because that is from a local artist named Sam Pruchneau, who is a Holocaust survivor. And he has several pieces in our museum that really tell, depending on which part of the story you're trying to tell in your class, it can tell the beginning, the middle, or the end. And in these 2 particular examples, one highlighting the Death March, there's lots of details that you can't get in this particular PowerPoint, but when you blow this up in front of your class, there's a lot of details that show the houses on the left, for example, how people were just watching them go by and no one knowing what was happening, and nothing happened. The faces on the prisoners are much more specific and detailed, because this particular artist wanted the world to know they were people. Whereas the guards really don't have much affect. There's not a whole lot to them. Anne, do you want to talk about the piece on the bottom right?
Sure, and I know that we're wrapping up for the day.
Yep.
This piece, Liberation, if you were to blow it up, and you are able to do, it is available on the HC website. You see the liberation trucks, the UN trucks coming in with various flags. That can be a whole conversation in your unit. They're throwing candy bars off of the tanks, and some kids are like, why on earth would you throw candy bars to starving people? Well, that's a main reason why, because it's easy on the tummy, and there were many who were from deep starvation had a bad plight as liberating forces came in. So this piece in and of itself is open for rich conversation. So all of these different pieces of artwork can support your study. So depending on your expertise, what lens you'd like to look through and what you'd like to pursue as you know your students best in your classroom, this is another thread that you can use within the study of the Holocaust.
And Scott, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. And Rick, thank you. This was so powerful. And being a visual learner myself, the artifacts I think are amazing for learning tools for our students. And having recently been to the center, I will say that the artifacts will move you emotionally. There's no doubt about it into diving into the content and this historical event. I will share there are some questions. However, our time is running short, and we have a very special presenter at our MCSS conference. So I want to leave, because many on this call are actually transitioning into the MCSS conference. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Rick and Ann. Wonderful presentation, for your time, your efforts, your expertise. We are so honored. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. You will be emailed a link for session 3. I have included in the chat a link to a resource folder for you here. The future email for our next session will also include a link for this folder as well. I want to let you know session 3, Remembering the Holocaust series, will be on next Wednesday, April 27th. That will be held from 4 to 5 p.m. So as a reminder, 4 to 5 p.m. for the next one. It is entitled Deep Dive Through Resources. The Zoom information will be emailed to you if you've registered 2 days prior, but I'll also keep an eye if you get in at the last minute. We also hope you are registered and participating in the Michigan Council for Social Studies virtual conference, which is following this up. Many of you are attending already. Dr. Rice, who started us out here, our state superintendent, is today's keynote speaker. So please transition into the conference from this wonderful start and brain warm up, if you will. So learn more. I put the link in for MCSS for you to follow. I've also added a link for the HC, so you can look all you want into the wonderful resources. The website itself is amazing. So a special thank you to the HC team that the two of you work with so exclusively. With that said, thank you everyone for joining us. We're looking forward to the next webinar series next Wednesday, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.